Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a really interesting gentleman to introduce you tonight to. I had the pleasure of interviewing him just about a year ago right now. Neil Seeman is his name. He is an author. He's an internet entrepreneur. He's a mental health researcher based at the University of Toronto, and he's the author of Accelerated Minds, Unlocking the Fascinating, Inspiring, and Often Destructive Impulses that drive the entrepreneurial brain. Wow, quite the book title. How did you get into understanding the entrepreneurial brain?
Well, Brian, I've been wrestling with my own entrepreneurial brain for a long time, having recognized that, as an entrepreneur, I often chase things, fail at things, succeed at some things, but all the while recognizing that some experiences kind of get me down. And in the course of that life, I studied my dad's research in dopamine science, understanding how the dopamine neurotransmitter works in the brain, and then postulated a theory in my book that entrepreneurs are especially sensitive to dopamine fluctuations.
Why don't you explain to everyone what dopamine is?
Yeah, dopamine's a naturally occurring chemical in the brain. It's also a neurotransmitter. And what really matters is the receptors, right? So the receptors for dopamine, they release the chemical, and the speed of release matters. So it affects our motivation, our reward center. It's often called our reward and risk center. And so entrepreneurs have a hunger for risk, a hunger for reward, and sometimes that balance goes off tilt, and we need to course correct.
So what is it that they're looking for? What is it that gets the dopamine release? They say that in casinos, they pipe in the music of the slot machines going clang, 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 because people get a rush, almost like Maslow's dog of the clanging of the coins. With alcohol addiction and other addictions, it's something about the rush that you get. Some people that say that with sex addiction, it's the fear or the excitement of the chase or getting caught or something like that. What is it that gets the dopamine rush to the entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good analogies, Brian. I mean, in the case of the entrepreneur, it's the rush. It's the rush of that first telling your friends and family that you're trying to build something new, and you're building a new solution to an old problem. Gambling's a really great analogy. Gambling is the most intense dopaminergic effect, and it's actually not the casino lights. It's somebody who's got a gambling addiction. That dopamine hit, it's faster than crack cocaine. It just hits you hard, and you want to chase it. Right? It's that infamous saying that you can never chase that first high. So in the case of entrepreneurs, we really need to know how to manage it at a personal level, at a system level.
How do you manage it?
Yeah, so I feel that there's, at an individual level, there's a philosophical path to doing that. You need to, on a daily basis, recognize why you've set out to build what you've built. On any given day, you have two highs and two low lows. Famous words of Ben Horowitz, the venture capitalist. And so you got to play the long game, right? You got to really focus, sort of Buddhist style meditation, and really understand what it is you're trying to build. At a system level, though, we need to really think about the incentives for entrepreneurs and think long term, right? So we built an entrepreneurial ecosystem that rewards short termism, and that's not in the interests of a dopamine sensitive entrepreneur.
How did you get intrigued by this? This is, you said, because of your father's work?
Yeah, my dad, Philip Seeman, he passed away in early 2021, and he's really sort of a world-leading dopamine researcher, having discovered the ways in which antipsychotic medications can have an alleviating effect for people with mental illness by how they attach to the dopamine receptors. And so, after he died, I really got engaged in his research, going back to the 1960s when he was at Rockefeller and all the amazing people that he worked with around the world. And then I tried to stitch that together with my own personal experience. I often say that our family business is dopamine, right? I mean, it was my second word growing up as a child, dopamine. And my parents were always fascinated by it. My mom, psychiatric researcher, often dealing with dopamine related drugs, and my dad, so talking about it all the time.
Fascinating. And then you decided to study it in entrepreneurs.
Yeah, entrepreneurs, and I define them differently than they're often defined in the media, right? So entrepreneurs, we have a sort of an association with them being, uh, 20 something startup kids funded by venture capital, tech focused. I don't think about it like that at all. I mean, entrepreneurs are trying to build something. They're people like you, Brian. They're people who are on a mission, creative. They tend to be creative, artistic. They often are trying to do something, almost always actually trying to build something for the people in the community that they love more than themselves.
And you've been an entrepreneur several times in your career.
Yeah, both in the nonprofit and the for-profit sector. Last one having been a tech global big data firm. It's what others perceive as success is not necessarily what the entrepreneur perceives as success, right? It's about the chase, the dopaminergic chase, but you want that to be a healthy chase, and you want to really focus on what's meaningful.
What a fascinating interest area that you've got. And I bet you something that not a lot of other people have thought about. I think people think that to be successful as an entrepreneur, you've got to have passion. You got to love what you do. You've got to have this dream of being successful. But what you're saying is it's more than that. It's this dopamine rush that they're chasing, and they got to keep it under control at the same time. So they got to harness it for the benefit of what it brings to their entrepreneurial zest.
Absolutely, it's all about modulating risk and making sure you maintain a healthy association of risk. We sort of have these messages about entrepreneurialism that are a bit out of whack, right? Steve Jobs said that to be an entrepreneur is to want to put a dent in the universe. I like that phrase, and no doubt, I mean, you need the passion, you need the desire, but it's more than that, right? I mean, the entrepreneurs I know, and it's a pretty large subset, whether they've succeeded or failed multiple times, as is the case with most entrepreneurs, they tend to be highly logical, determined individuals who sometimes fly off kilt, right? And although I may be, I'm alone in having put forward this sort of observation about the entrepreneurial world, there's been an increasing number of voices, Andy Dunn recently, and some other great entrepreneurs who sort of reflected back on, the number of suicides, the elevated risk for bipolar, major depression, major anxiety, ADHD among entrepreneurs, and everyone's been trying to figure it out. So my book is sort of part of that answer.
We're going to take a break and come back in just 2 minutes with Neil Seeman and understand a little bit more about where he's coming from. An article that he's written recently in the Globe and Mail about moral hazard, and some more about his book and his research. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Neil Seeman. He is a fascinating gentleman. He's written a book on mental health and entrepreneurs. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I stand corrected. I said it was an article in the Globe and Mail on moral hazard, and I was wrong. It was an article in the Toronto Star on moral injury. And we're going to come back and we're going to explain and understand that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. So Neil, thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that. Neil Seeman is the founder and chairman of a company by the name of RIWI. It's traded on the Toronto Stock Venture Exchange. By the way, what does RIWI stand for?
Real-time interactive worldwide intelligence, Brian.
Real-time interactive worldwide intelligence. Sounds like Chat GPT or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we came up with the name. Gosh, I think 2009, and the idea behind it was, hey, we wanted to survey people in real time. We wanted to survey real people wherever they were on the web, in any country in the world, in monitored environments, in particular censored environments like Ethiopia, the People's Republic of China. So, hey, that's where the name came from.
Fascinating. You have been CEO of RIWI from 2011 until 2021. At the University of Toronto, you are Senior Fellow in the Institute of Health Policy Management and Evaluation in the Dalla Lana School of Public Health. In June of 2022, he was named a Fields Institute Fellow. He's also a Senior Fellow at Massey College and a Senior Academic Advisor to the Investigative Journalism Bureau at the U of T. He's been listed in the Canadian Who's Who since 2002, holds a bachelor's degree from Queen's University, a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Toronto, and a Master of Public Health degree from Harvard. His research and ideas in big data analysis have been applied by decision makers and researchers in different fields to make sense of how people in all countries produce, consume, and understand information, and interesting enough, misinformation. We could have a whole nother talk on misinformation. What a fascinating background you've got. You spent 20 years at University of Toronto mental health policy, information science researcher, research associate, a senior advisor at Blackstone Law Group, a founder of the Health Strategy Innovation Cell, executive advisor and introducer, Fortune 500 companies, and you worked in consulting with IBM Healthcare, Gerson Lehman Group, and the Fraser Institute. What a fascinating background you've got.
Well, to borrow my brother Bob's words, I'm an interdisciplinarian. I thought he had made a grammar error, but yeah, I like being at the periphery of a lot of really interesting fields, working across fields, and that's really important to understanding, I think, entrepreneurship and discovery and innovation.
So this article that I called you about initially on not moral hazard, but moral injury. Tell me about it. What's the argument you're making?
Yeah, I'm making an observation about the modern workplace where there's an increasing number of people every day suffering from what I call moral injury, which is a concept that's been around since sort of the 1990s when people were studying sort of combat vets and PTSD. And it's this idea that in the workplace we're subjected to often individuals or in sort of experiences that are deeply wounding of our core ethical values. And when that happens, those wounds can be long lasting, often leading us to quit a job, acting out in rage, revenge, and leaving sort of searing scars.
Repeat this, please. We're in an environment that is against our moral attitudes and desires. Sort of
something happens to you in your job that hey, it can be a public humiliation in front of your peers by your boss or a colleague. It can be sort of a mandate that you do something like come to work when you're really sick, and insistence upon that that is so deeply offensive to your personal coda, right? Like what your values are, and that wounds you. It's more than a slight offense. It's something that is objectively offensive by any sort of objective third party, and you take that with you, right? And the scars build up, and it can sort of lead you to quit your job, and sometimes worse.
And you're saying this is getting worse?
Well, what I do know is that the rate of sort of people talking about it, psychiatric researchers, mental health researchers investigating it, exploring it is going up. And yeah, and I postulate that one of the reasons that the job the workforce is scarce is because there's a large number of people who are, in particular, older workers who've left the workforce because they they can't abide by an employer that, in particular in healthcare, that takes a position that is antithetical to their most deeply held moral convictions.
So there's been a lot of talk in sort of HR circles, organizational circles, about quiet quitting, the great resignation, the great breakup, et cetera. Is that what you're talking about, or something more profound than that?
Yeah, I'm talking about something that, it might lend itself. It might land in a quiet quit. It might land in a raging quit. But it's something deeper, right? So when psychiatrists started seeing this, it was in the case of veterans who had witnessed a deeply unethical act in their on the war front. But this is sort of grown to encompass situations where you can observe a colleague behaving really, really terribly, and it can balloon into kind of essentially bullying behavior, the kind of bullying behavior that you might have seen in high school, but it's just on such a grander scale.
So what do you do about it?
Well,
Quit?
yeah, I mean, a lot of people do quit. I mean, quitting doesn't solve the problem. Oftentimes you can sort of harbor ill will. Time does heal sometimes. But, again, my sort of recommended solution is really for managers and leaders to, in order to build trust, we've got to do a bunch of things in the workforce. One of them, I think, is to change the vocabulary around how we talk about employees. We're not resources. We're actually real human people. And, acrimonious debate should be dialogue. All of this language matters, but more practically, I feel that managers and leaders need to measure trust, right? You need to monitor it. This is what I'm talking about is a bit philosophic. It's a meta concept. So I think, people intuitively get it, but unless you measure it, you're not going to sort of give the signal to your employers that you're taking it seriously. And when you measure it, you can report back on it, and you can figure out what might be fraying that trust and what might be improving it. And it really matters, right? Because if you don't have a bedrock of trust in your organization, we all know that's going to sour your results.
How can you measure trust?
Yeah, I tried it when I was a leader of one organization. What we did is we had an anonymous survey, and it was not a perfect scientific construct, but we took Patrick Lencioni's model, the business guru who writes about trust, among other things. And we tried to essentially ask questions around the degree to which people felt comfortable in different environments in the organization. And we tracked it over time. We reported back on it. And it was really actually pretty fascinating. I mean, we did, over the course of 18 months, I recall, go from a 2.8 out of 5 to a 3.8 out of 5 on the trust metric, and it was positively collinear with a whole range of success outcomes. So who knows?
You were doing this by what? Just asking some questions about
we
your boss?
No, it wasn't. We had more subtle questions. I mean, more like micro questions, like imagine yourself in a situation where you were unclear about what your manager might have meant about something. Would you feel comfortable asking for clarification? Would you feel comfortable challenging a senior figure within the organization? These sorts of things, right? Like, it's sort of mechanisms by which you can give voice to quiet people. Quiet people are often, this is the work of Susan Cain, right? The genius of Susan Cain, right? Quiet people are often the ones at great risk of moral injury in the workplace because they have to be empowered.
Where did this idea of moral injury come from?
There's a psychiatrist, Jonathan Shea, who wrote about it in his book Achilles in Vietnam in 1994, 1995. And he sort of described it really as the unethical act in warfare, in combat environments. But then it evolved, and Brett Litz, a psychiatric researcher in Boston in the VA healthcare system there, Boston University, he expanded on it in the 2000s, and he said it goes beyond just what you might see as an unethical act, but it may actually be the mere act of feeling soiled by observing someone in your field whom you respect behave really, really terribly, really unethically. That can be a situation in which that might lend itself to a moral injury. Other situations where you might have been an unwitting participant in actually committing a kind of collective moral injury upon someone else. Those are the kinds of situations that can also give rise to moral injury.
I think a lot of us could understand sort of the PTSD that a soldier would have from a war situation. Just this past weekend, there were stories in the paper about Ukrainian soldiers going to mental health group sessions to try to get over PTSD from seeing their comrades being killed and some of the killing that they did do of Russians, etc. And I guess people can understand that would be traumatic and obviously causing a major issue. But issues in the workplace, I think people would have greater difficulty understanding and agreeing with. And so you're saying this is traumatic, like seeing someone die, or it's just seeing a boss be racist or sexist or doing something inappropriate?
Yeah, so I would really put all this on a spectrum, right? So I'd actually challenge you on the PTSD point. I mean, there was a time when really people actually did not take PTSD seriously at all as a construct, and then over time, people measured it, people evaluated it, and really only in the last recent years we really understood the extent of it just from the battleground. But beyond that, you're right. I mean, that people might raise their eyebrows with respect to the workplace and moral injury. But, the more people I talk to, when I write about these topics, people share with me their stories. They're ever present, I feel. And I think that, that's the problem with meta concepts like loneliness and social isolation and moral injury in the workplace. I mean, we know them intuitively to be real, and even if we may not have experienced them, we know someone we love who has. And so what we need to do really is talk about them, and then over time, just like we did with PTSD, come up with some criteria around how we measure it, right? And what is just a mere sort of moral offense that may happen sort of with a large degree of frequency versus a deeply injurious act, right? In the workplace, like for example, when you are sort of isolated and publicly humiliated for having done something insignificant in terms of a trivial math error on a PowerPoint presentation, or you've seen a boss sort of take credit for an intern's work, and then subsequently the intern was humiliated. I mean, we all have our workplace horror stories, right? And so it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum.
But you believe that this moral injury is actually increasing in society?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and what we've seen over the last few years with the pandemic is healthcare burnout in particular, right? So, and these are, we've called it burnout for many years, and I actually think the burnout does it a bit of a disservice. I think it's more than that. I think in some cases, yeah, okay, burnout. There's people in healthcare who are really tired, but in other situations, we have clinicians, we have healthcare providers who are leaving their jobs. We've got a scarcity of healthcare workers, and they're leaving their jobs in part. This has been widely reported on. I mean, they're leaving their jobs because they find someone who is sort of manifestly against all things public health, come back and revisit the hospital room on an ongoing basis and take issue with certain interventions, public health interventions, and that sort of really violates their ethical and moral core, and they find that really wearing on them personally. So beyond the wear and tear of just working really long hours, there's also that sort of moral sort of suffering and hurt. And so that's what I'm talking about. And I, we're seeing it in healthcare, and I suspect we're seeing it in a broad range of other industries. And I do believe we're seeing it with elder workers in particular.
I remember a situation in my past where I was disagreeing with some things that the company was doing. And I had a boss who I really respected, who said, keep your head down. Don't lift your head out of the trench. Otherwise you'll get shot like you were on the Western Front. Just keep your head down and do your job. So isn't that the attitude of a lot of people that sort of keep a stiff upper lip and just put up with it?
Well, I don't, if in that situation, I mean, I'm not sure if I know anyone who hasn't actually had an experience like that, Brian. That resonated with me. Actually, I think that's sort of my first or second job was kind of like that. But, I guess the question is, look, it's a spectrum. So in that particular situation, if it was something that was sort of, hey, if it was about backdating legal documents and doing something unethical, maybe keeping your head down is not the right thing to do. And maybe many years later, you're reflecting back on that and you're saying, hey, something about that sort of tore me to my core. I didn't feel right. And then that becomes a moral injury. And so it's hard to generalize, but that could evolve into one. Yeah.
So what are you recommending people do? Just quit their job all the time? Like, people need a job to live.
Quite the opposite, actually. Like I think, and I should say, right, that not just employees can be morally injured. I mean, CEOs can be morally injured from the behavior of employees. This is a collective challenge that we have. I mean, CEOs and leaders and entrepreneurs, I know this from experience, can feel really, really lonely and isolated and injured. So no, not at all. I don't think the solution is quitting your job at all. I think it's actually sort of bonding together and appreciating, okay, work is not a family. Work is a team driven toward a collective goal. But what it is an environment where we should care about each other's needs and be more relational, talk about it, document it, report it back. And in that context, as you build trust, as you build bonds, you become inherently more committed to the organizational goal.
My God, you sound almost kumbaya-ish. You worked with the National Citizens Coalition and the Fraser Institute. I thought you were a real right-wing kind of guy. Now you're talking about getting along and working like a team and empathy and stuff like that.
I'm not sure if all conservatives would suggest that team-like behavior is antithetical to conservatism. Many years ago, I wrote a paper on what I call post-partisanship, which is about process and coming together, right? And I didn't invent the concept of post-partisanship, but I define myself as that. And it's a process. Mayor Bloomberg was a big proponent. Governor Schwarzenegger was a big proponent. And it's a process by which you take a wickedly complex topic, often a complex dynamic topic, and you start from different points of view and you come together to come up with a solution. I know that's so sort of foreign to us in our current political environment, but it wasn't too long ago when people from different political parties used to
work together.
And
post-partisanship. What an interesting concept.
Yeah, so I did not invent that term either. It had been a term that had been around, and then Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Schwarzenegger sort of took it seriously. And then what I did is I simply suggested that we should take it seriously in public health and use it to think about really tough problems. At the time, we had a childhood obesity blue ribbon commission in Ontario that I sat on. And we had people from across the political spectrum really wrestling with that issue. people on the left, people on the right, people who, like myself, didn't really define ourselves by any political label. And we came up with ideas that I felt were really solution oriented.
Our guest tonight is Neil Seeman. He is an author, an internet entrepreneur, and a mental health researcher based at the University of Toronto. He's the author of a book I'm going to ask him about again called Accelerated Minds, Unlocking the Fascinating, Inspiring, and Often Destructive Impulses that Drive the Entrepreneurial Brain. Fascinating. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Neil Seeman in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.
I love the face.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Neil Seeman. He is an author, internet entrepreneur, and a mental health researcher based at the University of Toronto. Neil, we've been talking about a moral injury, really quite a fascinating concept I hadn't heard about. And you've got this new book coming out on the entrepreneurial brain and how entrepreneurs can be at much higher risk than other workers for major depression, bipolar disorder, ADHD, and debilitating anxiety, even suicide. I interviewed a gentleman, a very successful investment banker entrepreneur from Paris, France, actually, who had bipolar disease, and he credited it as being his success and his downfall. And he said that his bipolar gave it this incredible energy, but he had to harness it, otherwise it would end up being destructive to him. Why were you inspired to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, I was inspired to write the book because, like the gentleman you described, I mean, I've suffered my own mental health challenges. I've been quite transparent about them. I'm not sure if they fit into any particular box. They cross boxes of diagnostics. But yeah, I mean, I was inspired because largely I was seeing a lot of suffering among entrepreneurs who I know really well, and mental health suffering among entrepreneurs is the last thing that entrepreneurs tend to want to talk about, because, hey, they're investors, don't want to hear about that. They get worried, they get scared. But it's the most important thing, really, to talk about. I mean, at the end of the day, our prosperity as a country is dependent on the mental health of founders. I mean, 90% plus of all jobs over the next 10 years are going to be built on the backs of small, medium-sized companies. And unless we keep entrepreneurial mental health in good stead, we're going to put those jobs at risk. So that's why I was motivated to do this. I really care about this at an individual level, and I care about it at a social, economic level.
What kinds of moral and psychological injuries do you think entrepreneurs are at risk of getting, and why?
Yeah, so the moral scars that entrepreneurs sort of speak to, and maybe they don't use that language, but they're often in the form of feeling taken advantage of. Actually, I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is that entrepreneurs are not rich. They hang out with rich people. They may look rich on paper, but
they're dreaming of being rich.
Most founders are not rich. I mean, even well-known names, right? Like, and so, and often when they return to if it doesn't work out, if it fizzles out, they're at dramatically lower sort of economic prospects in terms of their financial wealth. So, they get scarred by that. So there's that sense of just mental health frailty, right? Like I was talking about burnout before, but again, it's sometimes you'll encounter people in the investor ecosystem that, for example, have a sense of short-termism, and you've got a sense of a longer-term trajectory. We're seeing that a lot now. I mean, with the blow-up of Silicon Valley Bank, I think we see firsthand just the intense demands on. I mean, this isn't the case of tech entrepreneurs, but all entrepreneurs. The demands to move fast and break things, to use the old Mark Zuckerberg expression.
But that VC, that venture capital, entrepreneurial Silicon Valley ecosystem, is that partially to blame for the environment that they live and operate in? I read numerous different articles about the downfall of Silicon Valley Bank, and it suggested that being part of that bank ecosystem was critically important to those people, and they wanted to put the money on deposit, so they got invited to the right, networking events, and they wanted, and it was sort of a badge of honor to have Silicon Valley Bank as one of your financiers, and/or you bought some of their equity. But that, and frankly, initially, that bank thought that they were so important to the ecosystem that the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley would support them. And just like 2 weeks ago, they had a big meeting and asked them to put up several billions of dollars, and it didn't show up. And that trust in that ecosystem quickly broke down as people rushed for the exits. So tell me, is that ecosystem part of the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to single out the VC community, or in particular that singular bank and its singular investment thesis. But look, it's a clubby ecosystem. It focuses on short-termism. It's dependent on that business model in particular, Silicon Valley Bank's business model, and it says it on its website. It is dependent on founders raising gobs and gobs and gobs of money using venture debt, such that they can then cycle quickly to get their next funding round, such that Silicon Valley Bank can take that money and invest it in long-term treasuries, government-backed treasuries, and then of course the formula didn't work in the end. So, I would say that's illustrative. It's just a symptom of a larger problem around short-termism, and I should say this in the North American and parts of the European investor ecosystem, large parts of Asia, Japan in particular, that I pay a lot of attention to, that has a more long-term sense of entrepreneurialism. And so I don't want to put blame, all on the foot of VCs. But VCs are part of a larger messaging model that says, hey, to be an entrepreneur, you got to be, you got to make money quick. You got to destroy things. You got to disrupt everything really quickly. And you've got to be kind of sort of venomous about how you do it, right? And that messaging, oftentimes it comes from the financial media, who oftentimes it has a sort of a little bit of a fixation on these tech wonderkins, when in reality your typical entrepreneur is sort of 40, mid 40s. Oftentimes and they certainly don't raise venture capital.
Well, to some of these dragon dens and pitch sessions feed that, where you got to go up and in 3 minutes make a pitch and see if you get funded or you're down. It's almost like you're back in the Colosseum in Rome.
And most entrepreneurs don't take that stuff seriously anymore. I mean, it's entertainment, right? I mean, and sometimes it's inspiring entertainment. I mean, it's always great to see someone sort of thrive on TV. But hey, that's just not real. Like, most entrepreneurship is about slugging away quietly, not getting profile. You're not profiled in fancy sort of venture capital glossy magazines, nor vetted or feted at California parties. You're slugging away, 7-day-a-week jobs, and you're doing it because you're committed to something big, something real, something lasting for your community. So I think it's, again, I mean, that's entertainment. It's hard to lay blame there, but it's part of a broader messaging problem.
Okay, so have you got a solution? What are we supposed to treat entrepreneurs with kid gloves now?
No, I mean, hey, entrepreneurs don't need to be treated with kid gloves. I mean, we're pretty tough people, and we tend to fight back. Problem is, we fight back a little too hard. Actually, somebody once told me had a bit of a Mike Tyson punch, which is not effective in the ring. You got to hold back. You got to be more like Muhammad Ali. You got to learn how to dance and hold back. So entrepreneurs are not fragile people, far from it. They're the reverse. So they have to be sort of managed. But I think, okay, so part of the solution is this pre-entrepreneurial messaging, I think, has to talk about the reality of failure, which is, look, that's part of the market dynamics. I also feel that at the investor level, people should be aware. I mean, should be aware of the mental health risks that can befall a founder. I think that founders need to sort of talk openly about some of their struggles. I think there's a lot of good work being done in California, in the UC system, sort of looking at entrepreneurial mental health and talking openly about that. And I think at the board level, I mean, look, if you can't talk to your directors about your mental health situation, then you're in rough shape. I would never want to be a seed investor in a company where I did not have the opportunity to have really open discussions with the founder in whom I would be investing.
We're chatting tonight with Neil Seeman about mental health for entrepreneurs and moral injury for all of us in the workplace. Fascinating conversation. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments from Neil Seeman in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. The Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. One of the interesting things about this gig of doing this radio hosting is I get to meet some really fascinating people. And this is the second time I've had an opportunity to interview Neil Seeman. I did a first interview with him about a year ago. And now we're chatting about moral injury for all of us in the workplace, which sounds sort of like PTSD, but maybe a slightly less harmful version of PTSD, and mental health for entrepreneurs. And it's really quite interesting. And this gentleman who's very involved in health research at the University of Toronto, as well as being an entrepreneur in the internet space, has written this book called Accelerated Minds, Unlocking the Fascinating, Inspiring, and Often Destructive Impulses that Drive the Entrepreneurial Brain. Neil, I really appreciate you joining us today and telling us about this. What's your bottom line message here?
Hey, thanks, Brian. I mean, the bottom line is entrepreneurial mental health matters, right? I mean, it's the foundation of prosperity, jobs for all of us. So both for entrepreneurs and everyone who loves them, their families, their colleagues, we've got to invest not financially, but just conversationally in the topic of entrepreneurial mental health, so that we can thrive as a country and as a nation of innovation.
I appreciate that. I guess one of the other ones, I think, is this moral injury is real too, and that what you're saying is that trust is so critically important. And you measured trust in one of your prior environments, prior companies. And I never thought you could measure trust, but it's interesting if you can find a way to measure trust, and that trust is so critically important, because I think that once trust is broken, it's impossible to work with people anymore. And so that really is key, that moral injury will break trust and make teamwork, collaboration, cooperation, just wanting to work together, kind of impossible. If people are interested in your work, have you got a website that they can go to?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I now have a personal author website, neilseeman.com. You can Google the book, Google my name, and you'll find lots about it. I'm really grateful for this conversation, Brian. Thank you.
We're grateful. If you'd like to learn more about Neil Seeman and his work, you can visit his personal website, which is www.neilseeman.com. That's SEEMAN.com. His newest book, which you can find at online booksellers everywhere, is called Accelerating Minds, Unlocking the Fascinating, Inspiring, and Often Destructive Impulses that Drive the Entrepreneurial Brain, published by Sutherland House. Neil Seeman, thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everybody. I I thank you for joining us, Neil. I really thank you for joining us. You can stream me online even from downtown Toronto at www.saga960am.ca. You can get me in the Mississauga, Peel, Brampton, West Toronto area every night at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. All my podcasts and webcasts are available on briancrombie.com, and I publish my videos on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, etc., and all my podcasts on Apple, Audible, Amazon, Speakeasy podcasts. So please check me out sometime and help me as an entrepreneur not have mental health, moral injury problems.
Absolutely, Brian. Let's do it together. Congratulations on your entrepreneurship, by the way. We don't congratulate each other enough. So way to go.
Congratulations on your book.
Thanks, Brian.
That's our show for tonight. Good night.